topic here today is women are all toxic. It's a little bit of a Ragebait topic today. The thing is I'm not trying to say this because I think men are absolutely superior to women and women are like the scum of the earth. There's an intentional by design methodology here, because the reason for it being is if there was in fact an equilibrium here, a true equilibrium where there was a 50-50 on everything, there would constantly be division. What's up, guys? This is God, Grit, and Glory, and I am your host, Veto Creed. We talk about the stuff that most people stay quiet about: Jesus, business, politics, and occasionally a few conspiracy theories. No scripts, no filters, just straight up truth. So join us as we unravel and speak truth. Welcome, guests. This is Veto Creed with God, Grit, and Glory, and we have another episode for you today. So I woke up, this is how you know you're getting old. You wake up and a different part of your body hurts. Sometimes it's your back, sometimes it's your side. Maybe you don't sleep right, or you sleep in the awkward position or whatever. Just a friendly reminder that we are in the body, and we still live in the flesh. Everything in this world is temporary. The topic here today is women are all toxic. It's a little bit of a Ragebait topic today. So the reality of it is people may disagree with this, and that's okay. I mean, obviously, 50% of our population are women, in some places even higher, just because of the crap they're putting probably in the food and into the water. But let me tell you something what's interesting about this ideology. We originally all come from the root of Eve. Right? So we come from the roots of Eve. And Eve is cursed. Ultimately, she's cursed because she's cursed to basically childbear in great pains. And she's also cursed to obey the husband, obey the man. And so her opposition is always going to be against that. Naturally, she wants to disobey. She naturally thinks she has certain capabilities. But God wasn't, he wasn't ignorant about this. He wasn't stupid about the fact that how he dealt with this. He actually gave men greater ambitions, greater motivations, greater abilities, and just about everything. And the thing is I'm not trying to say this because I think men are absolutely superior to women and women are like the scum of the earth. A lot of people may interpret it that way, but there's a dynamic here. There's an intentional by design methodology here. Because the reason for it being is if there was in fact an equilibrium here, a true equilibrium where there was a 50-50 on everything, there would constantly be division no matter what, because the person on the side that doesn't want to stop, they would never stop. Let's just be honest here. If women had the power and the strength and the intellect and the ability to overcome men, they probably would. They try. They turn to methods like manipulation and psychology and everything, that anywhere where they can, they flaunt their bodies, right, through, all sorts of methods. They lure guys in. This actually this happens a lot. We were doing a project for a client, and one of their sub-clients is, that owns one of the condos. They purchased it from somebody else, from a third party. The lady is 40 years old. In her early 40s. The guy is he's 80 years old. So she's probably in her mid 40s. He's in his 80s. Needless to say, she lured him in. And I got another buddy who owns a business out in Sarasota, and he owns a remodeling company. And he purchased a remodeling company from somebody else, a lady. And when he started digging in and found out a little bit more information about this lady, he found out that the way she acquired this company was she literally blackmailed her husband. She extorted him, shook him down, took everything. And there was another person in the crosshairs. It was actually a client that had walked in. And this client, when he walks in, she also lured him in. They eventually slept together. And then she extorted him and shook him down for a house. She said, I'm gonna blast you to the entire community. I'm gonna tell your wife. I'm gonna tell all the people. He came from a Mormon community. So he's like, you're going to be completely ousted and nobody's ever going to want to associate yourself to you. Some of the stuff that women do, like, and for quite literally no reason, you will never in the history of time see men doing this to women. The pendulum doesn't swing both ways. Men do not go out of their way to inconvenience and shake down a woman. And this is partially because women really don't have a lot to give. They bring no great value to our economy. It's not like you're going to shake down a girl because of anything. I mean, what are you going to shake her down for? But there is also this other thing that happens in our world that's disgusting to me. Women dictate everything when it comes to childbearing. And Satan has captured this unfortunate vulnerability and has manipulated the very malleable and very weak mind of a woman, because they are easily manipulated. You can literally take their minds and convince them that the world is flat, the sky is fallen. You could convince them of just about anything. And this is why, they've convinced women that they can be preachers. They could convince women that you could be lesbians. You've convinced women that you could be lesbian preachers. I even seen this podcast thing that came out about a lesbian preacher preaching in one of these, I think Episcopalian, I think is what it was, churches, and she's literally a lesbian. Obviously, she's wearing the rainbow thing around her neck to represent lesbians, and she's talking about how abortions are basically a sacred thing. You can't make this stuff up. It's absolutely absurd. And she's like, oh, I've had 2 children, but I've also aborted 2 children. And she's very proud of it. She's very proud of it because she's genuinely convinced that she has done a service for our world because she some babies. And they deliver this message. And this is primarily a reason why God didn't want women to be preachers, because women are incapable of delivering truth. Women are regurgitators of truth. They are not truth makers. They don't have the foreknowledge. God does not use them the same way that he uses men. We see this in evidence in the Bible. We see this evidential, basically, pattern that God uses men. I mean, there's a reason why he used the apostles the way he used the apostles, and there's no women there. There's a primary reason why some of the biggest falls in the entire history of our Bible were all done by women. Were all started by women. I mean, we can start obviously from Eve, where Eve obviously starts this temptation, and then it goes into Lot's daughter. After Sodom's destruction, the daughters get their father Lot drunk in successive nights and sleep with him to preserve our family line. They sleep with their dad. Like, you can't tell me that kind of stuff isn't disgusting. This results in the births of Moab and Ben-Ami, the ancestor of the Moabites and the Ammonites, later the rivals of Israel. So because of sin, they bore children. Their descendants became basically the rivals or the enemies of Israel. Potiphar's wife, she repeatedly seduced Joseph. And because of that, he was thrown into jail and he was imprisoned on false accusations. Delilah, we know the story of Delilah, the Philistine woman who seduces Samson, persisting presses him to the secret of his strength. The Nazarite, who vowed to never cut his hair, she betrays him to the Philistines. They shave his hair, obviously. And what happened after his hair is shaved, he loses his strength and they capture him. And so the great fall of man here, I mean, look at the pattern here. We have Eve, which is obviously the greatest fall of all time. And of course, in the situation, she blames Adam and Adam blames her. But I mean, there's some accountability issues here, but she ultimately blames the serpent, my apologies, and then he blames her, which he's not wrong. It is her fault. She seduced him. Women have seductress capabilities. They can seduce. So obviously the title of my message is Women Are All Toxic. I'm going to rephrase that. All women have toxic tendencies. They all have toxic tendencies because they come from the root of Eve. They come from the root of evil, where they were cursed and cast out for obeying the serpent. This is why they were stopped from making any big decisions. This is why men have headship over households, because God has given them not just the rights, but also the knowledge and the foreknowledge and the wisdom and the capabilities to actually do it properly. And of course, the story of them all, and I love to reference this probably more than anybody else, is the spirit of Jezebel. And Jezebel, by the way, they talked about her in 1 Kings chapter 16. It's Phoenician princess and the wife of King Ahab. She promotes Baal worship, prophets of God, engineers the false accusation and murder of Nobath to seize his vineyard for Ahab, and persecutes Elijah. The symbol of idolatry and wickedness. She meets a violent and as prophesied. So she meets a violent, basically death as prophesied. She's thrown from the window and eaten by dogs. So her influence ultimately corrupts Israel kings because she is a temptress. She is seductive. She is manipulative. So all of the evil, vile things that you see, and I believe that Saul's wife was the fall of his premise as well. I don't think that it was just him. And although Sarai is known to be the mother of all Israel, she is also an example of this. She's also the example of this. And then of course you have Bathsheba. David sees her bathing, summons her, and commits adultery. She conceives. This leads to David's arranging the death of her husband Uriah in battle. Their child dies as judgment. The house of David suffers ongoing turmoil. Ammon, Absalom, etc. The text focuses more on David's sin, but her involvement is central to temptation and the cascade. Some will argue and say, well, she didn't have a choice. She's summoned by the king. She has to obey. Although she was the one that foundationally did all these things. Herodias and Salome. Herodias, wife of Herodias Antipas, or Herod Antipas, sorry, formerly his brother's wife, holds a grudge against John the Baptist for condemning the marriage. At Herod's birthday feast, her daughter Salome dances pleasing the Herod and prompted by her mother, requests John's head on a platter. John is quickly executed. So Jesus's brother, we call it in the Slavic culture brother. It's a second brother, which is a cousin. It's a reference. So this is Jesus's literally brother. And he's executed because she had a vendetta against him. Herodias had a vendetta, and she had this vile desire to kill the man. And a lot of these vile desires, they stem from women. And I'm not saying, we obviously, we see a lot of bad, they're Herod the king, that we see a lot of bad kings doing stupid things in our history. But I will tell you, when there's a woman involved, and we don't even know the full story behind Herod's, planning and reasoning, there could quite literally be a woman standing there. We don't know that. But historically, when we read all of this, I will tell you, there is a pattern here. There is unfortunately a pattern here. And there's Sapphira, which is in Acts 5. With her husband Ananias, she conspires to lie about the proceeds from the selling of the property. And so this is done. And what ends up happening is she lies to the Holy Spirit. Her complicity is explicit. And then both of them, unfortunately, drop dead. Ananias dropping dead first, and then Sapphira dropping second. So we obviously mentioned Sarah. And then Sarai, who is ultimately becomes Sarah, she's renamed. She's barren. Barren means she can't have kids. She tells Abraham to sleep with her Egyptian servant Hagar. So she causes Abraham, the seed of Abraham. We know the story of the seed of Abraham. He's the father to our nation Israel. Let me phrase this properly. The true Israel, the one that God redeemed, the one that God basically founded and he blessed. This is the true Israel. This is the Israel that the Jews of the Sadducees and the Pharisees claimed to have the inheritance from and the blessing from. They did not, however. Jesus confirms that. But because she's barren, she basically tells her husband, let me rephrase it. She tells her husband to go and sleep with a servant, to commit adultery with somebody else because she's convinced that she is not able to conceive. And then what's crazy is when God promises her this, Sarah laughs at God's promise. So she mocks God's promise. So to her, it's somehow funny. She thinks it's funny that God has the power that he has. He laughs about it. So she questions who God is. She questions God's capabilities. She undermines God's plan, and then she creates her own. She devises a plan to create her own. As a quote, some may argue, well, that was a backup plan, blah, blah, blah. No, it wasn't. And then there's Rebecca. She favors Jacob, orchestrates the deception to blind Isaac, disguising Jacob as Esau. We know the story. To steal the blessing from Esau leads to family fracture. Esau's rage, Jacob fleeing, the lifelong tension. All of this is caused because of Rebecca, another woman. So some of the most strongest men of the Bible had the craziest wives, the most toxic wives. They don't emphasize this enough because in our culture, they do not want to talk about toxicity. They don't want, because all of it rolls into victimhood, and it rolls into sexism and misogyny and all of these terms that they've created and fabricated. Toxic masculinity, all of these things that obviously come from the opposition, which is Satan. But we want to make note of this. And then there's Rachel, who steals her husband Laban's household idols, the teraphim, while Jacob flees. She hides them and lies about it, contributes to ongoing distrust between Jacob's household and Laban. So Rachel is also guilty of deception and manipulation and finding secret tensions and laying basically things that cause conflict and chaos and havoc in the bloodlines and in the relationships. So she's driving tensions, she's driving division here. And of course, this one's actually one of my favorite. During Job's intense suffering, he loses everything. He loses his kids. He loses all of his servants. He loses thousands of his flocks of sheep and of cattle, everything. He had donkeys, cattle, sheep, you name it, all of those things. And he loses all of those things. And then on top of that, he lost all of his riches. And when that wasn't enough, he loses his health. And his whole entire body is covered in boils. And you think that he had enough at that point. You think you sit there and you say, if only he had a good wife to support him and say, honey, it's okay, everything will get better. No. Of course, Satan uses the wife to destroy him internally. She literally comes and she says, curse God and die. Fall over, old man. God is not here to help you. So she literally is positioning herself as Satan himself. Curse him. He doesn't care about you. Driving more doubt into him. Not being supportive. Not being his anchor. Being exactly what a lot of women have been historically is the opposition. Creating more problems for them instead of creating more solutions. And then there's Athaliah. She's the daughter of Jezebel and Ahab. After her son Ahaziah's death, she murders the royal heirs, nearly wipes out David's bloodline, and seizes the throne of Judah for 6 years. Idolatry and tyranny until Joash is revealed and she is executed. This is crazy, right? And then, of course, Solomon's foreign wives. They turned his heart to other gods, leading him to idolatry and the kingdom's eventual division. I mean, we read about this. We read about in Proverbs, foreign adulterous women who flatter, seduce, and lead men into destruction. We read this about in Revelation is the spirit of Jezebel as a false prophetess who seduces servants into sexual immorality and eating food sacrifices to idols. And then we missed a few here. There's a few others. There's Sapphira in Exodus, circumcision incident, but more ambiguous. And then we have Miriam speaks against Moses and Aaron. Leprosy judgment is instantly cast on her. The daughters of Jezebel had positive inheritance claim. Samson's Philistine wife pressures him to riddle answers, betrays to her people, escalates conflict. So, giving you guys a background of who Miriam was. Miriam was Moses' older sister and a prophetess who had led the women into worship after the Red Sea crossing. So she basically took it upon herself. She took it upon herself to make herself a prophetess. I think this was probably because of her jealousy. Maybe this was because of her pride. And then, of course, challenging God's appointed leadership. She wanted to take it upon herself. She's like, he's not a good leader. I can do a better job than him. And of course, this led to public humiliation, physical affliction, which is her leprosy that God sends upon her instantly. And then ultimately this stops Israel's entire journey through the desert. And then there's a story of Gomer. Gomer was the wife of the prophet Hosea. God commanded Hosea to marry her as a living parable of Israel's unfaithfulness to him. Gomer was repeatedly unfaithful, committing adultery and bearing children who were likely not Hosea's, a few being Jezreel or Laruha or Lo-Ami, meaning not loved or not my people. She eventually left Hosea for other lovers. God told Hosea to buy her back from slavery prostitution as a picture of redeeming love. So there's some symbolism in this. But God knew that she was going to be like this. So the fall was adultery and spiritual unfaithfulness, symbolizing Israel's idolatry, running to other gods like Baal. Solomon had 700 wives, 300 concubines, many from foreign nations like the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Sidonians, and the Hittites. And God had warned against intermarrying because they would turn hearts to other gods. As he grew older, these wives turned his heart away from the Lord. He built high places and altars for their gods, Ashtoreth, Malek, Chemosh, etc. But the Malek, we know, Moloch, M-O-L-E-C-H. Moloch is some of the gods that the Israelites still worship to date. They worship Baal. They worship Moloch. So the temptation is idolatry through intermarriage and influence. And then there's, I think it's Cozbi, C-O-Z-B-I, was the Midianite woman involved in the incident of Peor. The Israelites were seduced into sexual immorality and Baal worship with the Moabite woman. Cozbi was brought into the camp by an Israeli man, Zimri, in front of Moses and the assembly. Phinehas, son of Eleazar, took a spear and both Cozbi and Zimri in the act, stopping a plague that had already 24,000. So this was because of sexual immorality and idolatry. It provoked God's wrath and a deadly plague. So what was caused was that because of the Cozbi basically woman, the Midianite woman, she literally caused a plague on the people. These expansions show reoccurring themes: deception for personal family gain, sexual temptation, idolatry, jealousy of authority, and influence leading into nations and covenant consequences. We see the fact that some of these women, some of the stuff that they do is quite literally diabolical. And some will say, well, obviously there's, men have done a lot of things, that were bad as well. I say, yeah, but I will tell you what's interesting. there is very, very, very few guys in the history of our Bible that have done anything remotely as chaotic as some of these things. There's obviously, you can bring up the story of Esther. There's a handful of stories where women somewhat are beneficial to God's plan. But for the most part, when women are mentioned in the Bible, it's never in good light. It sort of creates this imagery or this picture that ultimately women cannot be trusted. And so I go into this saying, look, God says to love your wives. And I think there's a particular reason for this is when we are told to be the leaders, the headship of our households, to lead the household, we are called to do it by any means necessary. We have to make sure that our kids and our wives are in line. We have to make sure that the scriptures are preached from within. And we cannot skip a beat. We cannot turn around. We cannot fall away from this, because what ends up happening is, and I know this from a lot of guys, I know a handful of guys, they married girls from churches. Some of these girls were the ones that were sitting in the choirs and doing poems, going to Bible study groups. And these are the same women that cheated on them, had babies with other men. These are the same women that drove their husbands into alcoholism, into destruction. These are the same women that have created such chaos and division. There was a specific incident where I had a buddy, really good, close friend of mine back in the days, where a girl seduced him. It was very unfortunate because his wife was the cousin of this girl that seduced him's husband. So basically, it was somewhat of a family relationship. It wasn't like sister or brother, but it was cousin, so it was close enough. So the girl, his wife, cousin, and that person's husband, they're cousins. So it created this massive division in the family. People had to start taking sides. Obviously, some people were against it. Some people were trying to dismiss it, saying, oh, it's life. It is what it is. But what ultimately happened, unfortunately, to this person is she ended up leaving her husband for her new lover. And of course, he ended up leaving his wife because now he, was seduced by her. And they obviously didn't marry, but they ended up having a kid together. And through unfortunate events, and I had told this individual, and I said, you're playing with fire. And I'm not going to name any names. It's a friend. I don't want to put him on blast. But I had confronted him and I said, you are ultimately playing with fire, and God will judge you. God will judge you. If you think you're going to get away with the stuff that you're trying to get away with, God will ultimately judge you. And what ended up happening in a very unfortunate event is she ended up dying. I don't want to say too much, because if I tell you how she died, you're going to probably know exactly who it is, because it was a very, very tragic, but obviously a very unexpected death. Something that was supernatural. Let's just put it that way. God intervened. And I wish that this person had learned his lesson. I wish this person would have taken this life lesson and said, you know what, God, I hear you. I understand what you're saying. And the crazy part about this, let me tell you how crazy this gets, is this guy ends up losing his wife. Obviously, he leaves her. He loses his new girlfriend, who obviously dies tragically. He's left with the kid. The kid ends up getting taken by the parents. He turns to, stuff he shouldn't be doing, drugs and alcohol and other things. And he's left in just total demise, total depression and depravity. All because he chose to go after his feelings. All because he chose the temptation that was lured in by a woman. The temptation, the temptress, the toxic temptress that tempted him and said, hey, here you go. Take a bite of this pie. And it's as if it's full circle, because the wife that he had initially left, she ended up actually hooking up with another guy, and his wife actually slept with a black guy and had a couple of kids. Well, first and foremost, she ended up actually getting pregnant while they were still married by a black guy. Needless to say, he found out it wasn't his. So he, of course, left her. And now she's with this black guy. And I think the black guy actually ultimately ended up leaving her. So we see this pattern where women could literally either make or break you. And 9 times out of 10, they will create problems for you. Some of the most powerful men, some of the most powerful leaders in our history had these issues. And it is said that even though it's not written directly, a lot of these other powerful men, like Peter of the Bible, the Apostle Peter, he was also married. And his wife couldn't have kids. And they ended up having, I think, eventually some kids. But she drove a big wedge between God's calling and what he had to do. Women are ultimately, they can create a lot of barriers and conflicts. I had gotten together with a man recently, and his wife had suffered a very tremendous life-shaking incident. I'm not going to tell you, but she almost died. She almost passed away. And she survived. But I bring this up because I told him, and I said, unfortunately, I'm going to tell you this, and it's not something you're going to want to hear. But the reason why your wife got sick is because she is out of line. And God does this to a lot of women. And if women are listening, listen closely. Women, you have to understand that you are there intentionally, and God created you with intention for you to make sure that your husband could fulfill his purpose, for the men in your life to fulfill their purpose. And some of you will say, well, no, that's not how it works. I'm an independent woman. Well, that's what the world wants you to believe. But that's not what you were created. It literally says in the Bible, you will be saved through childbearing. It means you will be saved through your family. Your husband ultimately is the one that's going to save you. In other words, your husband is the one that is responsible for your salvation. And if a woman seeks the heart of the Lord, God will ultimately reveal himself to her, and he will give her a good spouse. But women, just as much as men, do need courtship. They need a spouse. They need somebody in their life. We are biological, but a woman has a significantly larger role in her life to be a good spouse. To be a good spouse. I'm not saying men should be abusive to their wives and neglect them and domineer them and do all these things. But ultimately, the woman becomes the servant to the husband. Period. There is no ands or buts. I remember when I was engaged to my wife, and I did this intentionally, very strategically. And I did it in front of her parents, which is my in-laws. I went to their house and I would tell her to do stuff for me. Hey, can you pour me a cup of tea? Hey, can you grab me this? Can you do this? And her mom made this absurd comment and said, you guys are not even married yet, and he's already bossing you around. And she's like, so what's the big deal? She didn't see that it was a big deal, but her mom did. And this is what I mean by toxicity. And let me tell you, her mom is extremely toxic. Extremely. That spirit of Jezebel, run her up. And she's planting these seeds of division and doubt and chaos and manipulation so that person understands that, oh, it shouldn't be this way. And what's crazy is this person allegedly, supposedly, however you want to say it, comes from a Christian background, and she thinks she's a Christian. And she doesn't understand because she doesn't submit to her own husband. I will tell you guys that openly. She does not submit to her husband. And my wife actually told her that to her face. You need to submit. When you learn how to submit to your husband, maybe your life will change around for you. She doesn't know what that means. And a lot of women do this, unfortunately. A lot of women try to take the reins. A lot of women try to usurp over their husband. They try to control the household, and then their household is in shambles. I will tell you, there will be no success in a household where a woman controls the household. It is not by design. If a woman, if you want to control your household, you want to undermine your husband, you want to undermine God, 95% of you women will end up being in the poorhouse. You will end up being sick. You will end up actually hating your life. You may struggle with depression or other sin or alcoholism or other things because God will punish you and he will sell you out to your own lusts and your desires, which will ultimately destroy you. And you will ultimately destroy your household because that's not the design. The design is not for the woman to take headship. The design is not a 50-50 role. That doesn't exist. The design is that man rules over the household. And God equips them with the ability to do so. A lot of women will turn around and say, well, women can't rule. Let me rephrase that. They say women can rule, but they shouldn't. And then they turn around and they do the opposites. Or some women will come out and say, well, my husband can't rule. He doesn't know how to, so I have to step it up. And then if you sit there for 5 minutes and you observe their behavior and you look at the way she talks to him and the way she treats him, and anytime he takes one step forward, she makes him take 2 steps back. She literally chases him into the corner like, oh, you better not get out of line. And I see this to me and I'm disgusted because this is not the design. And men have become weak. You guys are impotent. You are impotent in your households. And incompetence is a whole new level, but I will tell you for sure you're impotent, meaning the fact that you are incapable of doing that which naturally God has designed you to do in your households, and you need to step it up. You need to learn how to do it properly. Of course, you got to keep praying for the wisdom. And let me tell you something. If your wife has been doing this for a very, very, very long time, it's going to take a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge and a lot of sleepless nights to get past this problem. Because what ends up happening, it's like raising up a bad child. You have to break their old habits. And this is why I tell you, sometimes it's okay to spank your children. Use a belt. The Bible encourages it, in fact, because there are certain things that if you allow it to keep progressing and progressing and progressing, the kid will literally become a freaking pain. He will become unbearable. And he will become a burden on society. And of course, a burden on your family. Because it's not stopped early. And men mistakenly do this. I mean, the list here is endless. And I'm not even naming all of the people from the Bible, but a lot of these falls are caused by this. So I literally just went through a total of 20 women. And these are the main roles. And if you compare these roles to the men that they are married to, they have opposition roles. I mean, Samson, he is a judge. He's found to be the future redemption for Israel. You have Joseph, who ultimately leads everybody out of famine. He's chosen, handpicked by God. He's thrown into a pit, sold into slavery. Potiphar ultimately recruits him. Potiphar's wife deceives him. He goes into prison. God refines him. He comes out. And ultimately, he redeems his family because he was smart enough and more wise enough, I should say, by having the insight and being God-driven to do this. Bathsheba, of course, she deceives David and ultimately causes him to stumble and fall, which is David. He wrote all of Psalms, and he is one of the biggest examples of power and examples of somebody after God's heart. And then Bathsheba, a woman, causes him to stumble. Abraham, who is the founder of Israel, the blessed nation, ends up getting stumbled by a woman. You have Herodias. She ultimately kills God's brother, which is John the Baptist. And the list is endless. Job's wife, this is the biggest example of somebody trying to overcome the hardest, most difficult thing in his entire life. And it's like when it rains, it pours kind of mindset. And of course, the wife in there, I find this joke kind of hilarious. It's kind of like somebody came to Satan and he says, hey, you took everything from him. You took his money. You took his kids. You took his pretty much his sanity. You took his health. Why did you leave his wife? Why didn't you take his wife? It's like, you forgot his wife. He's like, oh, I know. I did it on purpose because I know how she is. I know what she's capable of. And I'm going to use her to destroy him entirely. So I mean, as I sit here and talk about this, I want you guys to understand that all of these things can be ultimately defeated by the blood of Jesus. A woman can, in theory, control her toxicity. And women will turn around and say, well, guys are toxic too. I mean, yeah, guys can be toxic, but that is not their natural response. Their natural response might be to fight, not necessarily to be toxic. Toxicity is more of a deceptive practice that is vindictive and manipulative and has a tendency to be very, very premeditated. Premeditated as in they plan strategically to destroy somebody's life. Sort of like the Jews are right now. They're very strategic. And what do we know about the fake Jews, the modern day Jews today? That they're fake Christians and they're called the synagogue of Satan. Same thing. That roots from that original demonic force. And so as I sit here and I talk about these things, I want you guys to understand that this stuff is extremely important to wrap your head around. So thank you guys for tuning in. Veto Creed, God grant glory.